Again, Ed Friedman, I'm the chair of Friends of Merrymeeting Bay. Our presenter tonight, Steve Brooke, I've known for many, many years, was a conservator at the Maine State Museum for 17 years. From the State Museum, Steve went on to the State Planning Office, where he was active in our very successful, for quite a few years, Land for Maine's Future program, the most successful bond issue that the state has probably ever had. He is working hard with an Upstream group, pun intended, from here, based in Gardner, and their focus is on restoring fish passage to the Cobboseecontee stream and the Cobboseecontee watershed, and doing with the kids some of what we've done with the kids down here in the Bay Area, getting them out and about. And in this presentation, towards the end of it, you'll see some of the work there and the fun there that the kids are having. So I want to thank Patagonia very much for sponsoring this series for quite a few years. This is about our 22nd year. So without further ado, Steve Brooke, and thank you all for coming.
So one of the things that I like most about being in Maine is being able to be in different parts of our state. And we live in a corner of North America. And I think all across North America, it doesn't make any difference where you are. Each part of our nation has something very special. But to me, what's most special being in Maine is being on the East Coast. And I think our East Coast is special mostly because we've got a Gulf Stream. And the Gulf Stream takes the water out of the southern oceans and sweeps it up all the way across and keeps all of northern Europe warm. And that warm water collides with the cold Arctic waters right up here in our little place that's the Gulf of Maine. And I think the Gulf of Maine is really a very, very special place. What's really special about the Gulf of Maine is the cold water that comes down across the Scotian shelf, off Nova Scotia and all the way down from Labrador. And it actually turns the corner and swings up into the Bay of Fundy, comes down through a couple of gyres. And it comes out and it circles around off George's Bank before it discharges and kind of works its way south. And it's on the edge between the warm water of the Gulf and the cold water of the North Atlantic. And that really creates some really special opportunity for us living on the edge. I think that one of the things that makes it most special are 4 spots that I've identified here. Let's look at them one at a time. And let's start down where Massachusetts and Maine come together in the Great Salt Bay of New Hampshire. And Great Salt Bay is this big inland way that's connected to the Piscataquis River. And there are 5 rivers that come into this Salt Bay, but what we don't have are any big lakes. So it's only drainage that creates fresh water. This is almost all brackish and salt water. But ecologically, it's a really exciting place and a place that you should visit because you have different fisheries, you have a whole range of birds that come through. Let's go back and look at the next spot that I think is pretty special. Let's go right down here, just south of Portland. And here we've got Scarborough Marsh. Are any of you birders? Do you enjoy go birding? This is one of the great places to go birding in Maine. Scarborough Marsh, right inside of the great beaches that are just above the Saco, wind in, and this is probably 3 or 4 miles, and it's a couple of miles across. It's a great place to go walking because you can get out on the old railroad bed that goes across here, and there are lovely places to walk. The vistas are lovely, the walking is easy, and if you like to striped bass fish in the summer, this is one of the great places to come because the stripers come in and they hang out right at the mouths of all of these little estuarine rivulets. And in the turn of the tide, as all the things get swept out, the stripers are there and chew them down. I love sturgeon. And I was astounded a few years after we took the Edwards Dam out. I was standing in a parking lot right here, and I saw a sturgeon leap up in here. Wow. Kennebec sturgeon finding its way down. Now, if you go down and sit on the beach in the summer, you're likely to see sturgeon rolling in the surf. It's amazing, and they're all Kennebec fish that are spreading their way up and down along our coast. It's a really exciting place to be. All right, so where else do I think is special? I like the interfaces. I think Cobboseecontee Bay up on our other border. We've already seen what's down here, but Cobboseecontee Bay, where we get together with New Brunswick, is another very special place in Maine. And what's interesting about Cobboseecontee Bay is this red line is the border. And this is the river that divides the two. And what's special about Cobboseecontee Bay is the enormous amount of estuarine habitat that it has. On the American side, it's almost all entirely saltwater, and it's saltwater because, again, there are no lakes that feed it. The massive lakes that feed this whole estuary are on the Canadian side, and they're way up on the border lakes between Maine and New Brunswick. And there are enormous impounded lakes, and they create an enormous amount of very exciting fisheries. The St. Croix River is really special. There's a paper mill up in here that provides a lot of blockages, but they have fish passage. You can get river herring up into this estuary, and it is very productive. But one of my favorite spots is right here off Eastport, and it's where the old sow and the piglets hang out. If you've ever heard of the old sow and the piglets, the old sow is the largest whirlpool in North America, and the piglets are little whirlpools that spin off it. And you don't want to go out there in a kayak. You want to go out there in a 30 or a 40-foot diesel boat so that you can get away from it because it'll eat you alive. It's just astounding. It's really a magical, magical place. Again, special places to be in Maine. So north of us there are some, south of us there are some. We've got the Penobscot Bay and all of the estuary that it has. But let's talk about home areas. Let's talk a little bit about Merrymeeting Bay. And I think Merrymeeting Bay is one of the most exciting places on the East Coast. We have 6 rivers that fall and that discharge into this big mixing bowl. And it's a mixing bowl, and it swirls through a very narrow gut coming down to Bath. And what's special about Merrymeeting Bay is it's mostly freshwater on the surface, so that all of the tidewater and all of the wild rice that comes up at the base of Swans Island can really survive, and it thrives. It's an extraordinary place, not only for fisheries, but for all of the birds. It's migratory bird hangout and passageway. And that's really special for Merrymeeting Bay. But the best part of it all is all around here. Because if you look carefully, look at all the interconnected waterways. You've got the main stem Kennebec that comes down. You've got the back river that kind of wanders out across up into Wiscasset. Again, that comes down all the way to the Boothbay Harbor region. You've got the Sassanoa that comes across here. Boy, you want an exciting place, you go to the Reversing Falls on the middle of this river, and it's just astounding. But if you look carefully, and it doesn't show easily here, on the Sassanoa there's a great big saltwater tidal estuary that comes in. And this little tidal estuary up in here, that's where all the short-nosed sturgeon in the Kennebec Basin like to spawn. It's prime spawning habitat for short-nosed sturgeon. It's a magic place, and it's the combination of Merrymeeting Bay and some of the upstream habitat that we'll talk about next, with this interconnected waterway where all the juvenile fish can go and they can grow up a year before they go to the ocean. That makes the Kennebec such a productive ecosystem. Now, if we go immediately upstream from Merrymeeting Bay, so here's Merrymeeting Bay, this is the big tidal. The Androscoggin comes up, here comes the Kennebec, and that's Swan Island with Richmond. And we go up the Kennebec, and this is the city of Gardner. And up on the city of Gardner comes Cobbosee Stream. And Cobbosee Stream has a watershed that's about 217 miles. And it's unusual because almost 10% of it is lakes, ponds, and the stream itself. It's a really unique and special spot. And if we look at it in a little bit more detail, I've outlined all of these big pieces of water. We've got 3 big lakes that are over 1,000 acres. This is Cobboseecontee. It's connected to Anabasacook, and Anabasacook's connected to Maranacook that goes all the way up in here. And these are the type of lakes when they're connected through a stream that comes down. There's a little old dam right there, but then it winds down, and it winds down, and it winds down, and it winds down, and about here, it drops 100 feet going into the Kennebec. And that's a special space for many, many things. And it's really where the birth of the Industrial Revolution took place, among other places all over the state of Maine. This is a small river that at one point had 5,000 horsepower in 7 dams. That was hydromechanical power. And it was paper mills, and it was grist mills, and it was tanning sites, it was machine shops that were all powered by mechanical water. Today, 3 of them remain. And in fact, since the first dam was built here on Cobbosee Stream in 1761, there has never been fish passage for the sea-run fish up into this enormous watershed with so much habitat to protect them. And so this is a photograph that Ed took from his helicopter, and you're looking south, so you're looking up this way from here to here. And this is the site of the Gardner Paperboard Dam. And you can see this little dam built in the 1840s out of granite blocks. And you go a little bit further up, and oh, here's the American Tissue Dam. Again, there was a big paper mill here. This was the first paper mill in the state of Maine. And this dam is unused today. This dam is generating a very small amount of electricity, and it's about to be given a new 40-year license. Then there's one more dam right up in here that impounds Cobbosee Stream, Pleasant Pond, pond in the river here, all the way up to here. So this is all impounded right up here at the New Mills Dam. It's very interesting, and there's been no fish passage since 1761. And so when you get a run of fish, these are all alewife for the most part, descriptions of the population of these fish where you could walk across a river on their backs, they came so thick. And there is places that you can in fact go today and see them, just like this. And turns out that in fact they're what's called a keystone species. Now this is a species that has a disproportionately large impact on the environment relative to its abundance. These species are described as playing a critical role maintaining the structure and ecological community, affecting many other organisms in the ecosystem and helping to determine the types and numbers of various species in that community. I mean, this is a technical definition, but really without the keystone species, the whole ecosystem is dramatically different. So keystone species are rare. And in fact, alewife are one of those keystone species. Alewife run about a pound apiece. They're a foot long, give or take. And they'll spawn in the lakes and ponds, and we'll go through that. And they'll go out to sea for 3 or 4 years, and then they'll come back as adults. And they come back, and they carry 60 to 100,000 eggs. Wow. So one pair can make 60 to 100,000 juvenile fish. Wow. And you saw the numbers of them. That's really pretty remarkable. And these are the fish that feed them all, right? They feed the otter. They feed the mink. They feed all the little weasels that come. They feed the raccoons. They feed the seal. They feed a whole lot of mammals. And not only do they feed the mammals, but they feed the birds. When I grew up, bald eagle were rare, and that was primarily because of DDT. But it's also because they didn't have anything to eat, because a lot of the species that they needed to be available to them weren't there. Alewife among those species. So loons will eat the juveniles, all the small birds, all of the ducks that you'll find that are carnivores. Osprey are marvelous to watch because they'll fly along over the water and they'll see a fish and they'll dive for it. They'll go into a wingback dive. They can swim underwater with their wings to chase the alewife, and they'll bring them to the surface and they'll walk away with them. And guess what happens at that point? The bald eagles come in and they try to make them drop it. So you find these aerial wars over the Kennebec when the alewife are running. All of the heron will sit along the edge and they'll pick up the juveniles as they come down and migrate out. Pretty important. But even more important, these keystone species feed the food that we like and the food that we need. The halibut, all of the fish. I got to go back to my notes. So the hake, the halibut, the cod, this is literally the fish that feeds them all. Striped bass in the Kennebec come and chase the alewife. I've seen a pod of striped bass at the landing in Hollowell form a line, and one at a time will jump into a pocket where they have a whole bunch of alewife and pick out one fish. They take turns. They work together. These fish are smart. They're not what we think of fish are necessarily. So this small alosa is really a key stone species for the world that we live in, and it's something that we're just beginning to respect and understand to the point where we're beginning to take steps to restore this fishery. And when I worked on the Edwards Dam, and it will be 20 years ago this summer that the Edwards Dam was removed, we began to restore the river herring in the Kennebec. And that run is now over 6 million fish at Benton Falls on the Sebasticook from none in 20 years. And the thing is that if we can open up the Cobbosee drainage, we're going to open up something that's really special. This spring, when the alewife are in, you all need to go up to Vassalboro and the outlet to Weber Pond. Here's the city of Augusta, and you just keep going right up the river road, up till you get up just north of Augusta. It's a little side road that goes in, and at the outlet to Weber Pond is one of the most important viewing places for alewife close at hand. And what's really... We'll go away from that. Apologize. Yeah, that wasn't supposed to happen. What that does is that shows from the river up the fishway. And up the fishway, it goes into a big box that opens out on Weber Pond. And for 3 days every week, those fish swim free into Weber Pond and the pond that's upstream of it, and it's created an enormous alewife run. The other 4 days of the week, well, the bait dealers arrive. And they have an agreement with the city of Vassalboro, and they net thousands of pounds of alewife for commercial harvest, and it's all part of the balance of this run. If all of those fish were allowed to go in, it would overwhelm the lake, we think, maybe. We don't know for sure. Nobody's ever done it. But we do know that if the alewife harvesters work on 4 days a week and they let it free swim for 3 days, the run keeps building every year, a little bit at a time. And that's the balance point that we need to be in at this point. So it's really exciting to watch this all happen. We ought to talk quickly about some of the other creatures that live in the Kennebec. And this guy's my favorite. This is the size sturgeon that are common in Kennebec. We've got a few years before they get to grow this size because they grow very small and very large, very little every year. This is a sturgeon skin that Ed found, and afterwards, please come up and look at it. This is a fish that has an exoskeleton. It doesn't have any bones. And these scutes, these cartilaginous scutes, were used by the Native Americans for not only decoration, but for bowls. They carried them with them from many places. But I think this is an exquisite creature. And when I think of a creature like that that's this age, this fish is probably close to 100 years old. How long did they live? Well, they got up to 16 feet long up in the St. Lawrence River. They might be sturgeon that are some of the great lake monsters that people talk about. We don't know. We don't know enough about them. They have a little cousin that's called a short-nosed sturgeon that only grows to be 4 feet long. And they are on the endangered species list. They're also here in the Kennebec. In the spring, you can see these sturgeon leaping, and they leap out of the same spot every year. I think the same fish comes back to the same place on their spawning run. My son used to free dive down off Biddeford, and he found a spot that he could go every Memorial Day weekend and swim with the sturgeon 30 feet down. There was a big pot of them, and they'd come in, and he said they were docile. They weren't at all concerned about him swimming around, and he could only stay down for a little while as long as his breath would go. He said when they moved, they were so powerful. And you can tell the power in this fish. I saw a fish in a photograph that was this side, drawn up on the beach in Randolph, Maine, being cut up for food for the people. And there's a recipe for sturgeon in a Randolph cookbook that I found. It's really interesting. But these are creatures that are honestly dinosaurs that live with us. They haven't changed evolutionarily for millions of years. And it's really special to see their community really building the way it is in our Kennebec. Who else lives in the Kennebec? Who knows what this is? That's right, that's an Atlantic salmon. That's a salmon that's fresh from the sea. You can tell because it's silver even on his back. Once the salmon are in the river for a little short period of time, their backs go black. So when you look down on them, you can't see them. They're silver because they've been in the ocean and they want to disappear. So photochromatic fish. These fish go all the way up along the Appalachian Trail to spawn in the Sandy River drainage. And they can't get there very easily today. That's a real problem, and it's something else that we'd like to be able to be working on more. But they're very special fish, and they're on the endangered species list. It's not likely that I will ever be able to fish for them again in my lifetime here in the Kennebec, because it's going to take that long if we can restore them. It's not clear to me that we can. Here's another fish. Who knows what that one is? That's right, that's a brook trout. We've got brook trout in the Kennebec. In fact, we've got brook trout in most of our small coastal streams along here. And they'll go into the ocean. And when they feed in the ocean, they turn silver like the salmon. So this guy has never been to the ocean. This is a pond brook trout. That's a bigger brook trout than you're likely to find in the Kennebec. It's possible that there are some, but they're definitely here in our river. And it's something that we should be aware of. And they're in the streams in particular along beside our river. Okay, who's this? What kind of eel? This is an American eel. In fact, this is what's called a silver eel. This is an adult. This fish is someplace between 15 and 25, maybe 30 years old. Wow. They're a delicacy in most of the world. And they fall out of our lakes and ponds going back to the ocean because they're what's called a catadromous fish. They're not anadromous, they're the opposite. They're catadromous. They go out to the ocean to spawn. They go down to the Sargasso Sea, someplace off Bermuda, and it's in the Bermuda Triangle. And all of the American eels from the whole North Atlantic Ocean go to the same place to spawn. And as they spawn, their eggs drift to the surface in their long chains with little black dots in them. And they float north in the Gulf Stream, that Gulf Stream that I talked about. And they hatch out at different places along in the Gulf Stream, and they swim to shore. And when they come to shore, they come ashore as elvers. These are called glass eels. And this is the most valuable fishery commercially that we have in the state of Maine today. $1,000 a pound, alive and kicking for export, where they grow them out into black eels that they can eat. The American eels come in, they work their way upstream, they go as far as, how about Baxter Park? I remember seeing one caught off the bottom of Russell Pond, and I got to look at my notes to remember, that's 1,340 feet above where we stand today of elevation. And these creatures are amazing because they can get out and they can work their way up around a barrier on dew on the grass. They literally can survive in the air. If the water is on the rocks, they can work their way up the rocks. They can find holes in most dams to get by, or many dams to get by. They can't get by the dam out here on the Androscoggin. These are a very important creature ecologically because they live in the bottom of our lakes and ponds. We don't even know that they're there for 15 years, 20 years, and then they go back to the Sargasso Sea to spawn again. Amazing, amazing creatures that live with us that we don't even think about regularly. Okay, what's this one? That's a lamprey. That's a different kind of eel. That's another very interesting creature that comes into our rivers to spawn, and the eggs go down into the dirt. They spawn into the dirt, they grow out and they spawn. They grow up into little ones over the course of the summer. Over a year, they'll go out back to the ocean, and that's when they put on the teeth. They don't really turn voracious the way they are. They'll attach themselves to a fish and serve as a sucker on that fish, but they don't do that a great deal in fresh water. They do that primarily in the ocean. And they're very important because they use their mouths, the adults do, to lift rocks and create a pile of stones to hold their eggs. And they'll lay their eggs on the top of the stones and they'll fall down in, but water can get through those stones and they can be oxygenated as they're hatching before they go into the mud. When you pick rocks up on the bottom of a river, the gravel fills in, and that's what the salmon are looking for, and the other fish that have nests in the bottom. Most of the bottoms of these rivers are armored. They're so hard, if you drop an anchor, it goes ding, ding, ding along the bottom. You can hear it at the end of the line. And what's really interesting is these are really important fish because they break up that bottom and allow other fish to spawn.
And they've been around almost twice as long as sturgeon.
It's amazing. It's amazing. They're part of our ecosystem that we never think about. But they're all right here in our Kennebec. Okay, this one? That's either an alewife or a blueback. I can't tell the difference, but it's part of this river herring family that we're going to talk about a little bit more detail now. The blueback herring, the American shad, and the alewife are very close cousins. And they come at the same time of the year. The American shad is pretty big. These are fish that'll go 3 to 5 pounds. And they're exciting to catch. They catch like an Atlantic salmon. They'll run, they'll jump. They're very active fish. They'll carry 200 to 300,000 eggs as a female. And they are broadcast spawners in the main stem of our river, in the Kennebec. And they like what's called a laminar flow, not a choppy flow, but a flat flow, so that the eggs will hold together so they can be milted by the male that will circle around the spawning female. And the eggs have to hatch shortly so they can't go into soft mud in the bottom. So the main stem Kennebec is the primary spawning habitat for American shad. I think it's a different place every year, depending upon the flow at the time they arrive. Because they know what they want, and that's where they go. Blueback herring, almost identical. And this color difference, I think, is fictitious, because I can't tell the difference between them. The blueback has a different eye, and they have a different jaw, and they have some internal parts that are different. But the blueback is also a riverine spawner. And their eggs are adhesive. And the female will attach their eggs to rocks and boulders on gentle riffle sections of the river. On the base of Messalonsky Stream up in Waterville is one of the places that bluebacks spawn. Cobboseecontee Stream is a place that bluebacks will spawn. And so that's the riverine, the roily part down through the city of Gardner. And again, look at the number of eggs. And when you see numbers of eggs like this, you can tell how few of those eggs will survive to be adults to spawn again. And these are keystone species as well as the alewife. But I'm going to focus on the alewife because this is the creature that we're trying to get back into Cobbosee Stream. This is a creature that'll have 60 to 100,000 eggs. The males come first, the females come second. They work their way up to the lakes and ponds, and they like warm water lakes and ponds primarily for spawning. And after they spawn, the adults will drop out and go back to the ocean. And we know they'll come back for 5 years. They may come back for 6 or 7 if they survive in the ocean as a whole. But the juveniles will grow out in the fresh water. And let's look at their life history a little bit. So they'll come in to spawn in May and June, and the eggs will incubate for a week or so. And then they'll spend really most of the summer growing to 3 or 4 inches in the lakes and ponds. And in the fall, with the first of the big rains, when you get these freshets of water coming out, they start moving downstream. And I haven't seen this yet, but my friends tell me that on Merrymeeting Bay today, there are enough juvenile alewife to literally cover the surface layer for almost 3 feet of most of the bay. The bay shimmers. I've seen photographs of it. It's really remarkable. And so you need to go to Merrymeeting Bay in the fall and just kind of drift through the bay with the millions and millions of juvenile alewife that are moving out, down through Bath, up the Sassanoa, all through the little estuaries, where they'll hold pretty much until they get big enough about a year after that to go out to the ocean, where they'll spend 3 years and come back. So this is the keystone species that Upstream is working hard to try to reintroduce into its native habitat on Cobbossee Stream. This keystone species has a range from northern Florida all the way up to Labrador. I couldn't fit it on the map. The map got too small. But think of the number of rivers on this coast. Think of the estuaries on this coast. And think of the habitat that this fish once had. And think of the number of fish that meant feeding our offshore fishery. Today, this is the landing of alewife in pink. And look what's happened, even since 1950, from 8 million pounds down to less than 1/10 of a million pounds. They say it's 97% of this population has been lost since colonial times. Pretty dramatic for a keystone species. I wonder where all of those offshore fish went. Well, they got to have food, and the fish haven't been there. This is American shad, also declining. And why have all of these fish just disappeared? Well, they can't get to their spawning habitat, and that's the problem. In Maine, we've been restoring alewife since 1950. And we thought we were doing pretty well until all of a sudden, in about 1980, there was a big drop. And at that time, they started closing the harvest on alewife so that you had 2 days closed and 5 days to fish. Didn't work too well. So just in the late 1990s, they went to 3 days closed and 4 days to fish. And look what's happening. The populations are beginning to build. But what's most important of all, look at this blue line, because this is the value of that alewife harvest. And wow, why has that gone up so? And what are they used for? Well, they're used primarily as lobster bait. And it's lobster bait early in the season when there's no other lobster bait around. Rest of the year, they prefer to use Atlantic herring. And about 10 years ago, we had big Soviet trawls in, taking our Atlantic herring in enormous numbers. And all of a sudden, we've got a crisis offshore because the Atlantic herring have collapsed. So what are we going to feed the lobster? I don't know. Maybe we can start restoring some of these rivers and start our own carp. Well, yes, there are people that are feeding them carp. There are people that are feeding them carp. I think that we should feed them the surplus that we generate of alewife, and we need to find a way of keeping the alewife fresh over the whole summer. This is the state of Maine, and these are the main rivers that have potential for a significant amount of river herring, millions of fish. This is all part of the St. John River. There we go. And the St. John River comes and drains all of this area of Maine to the north, and the St. John River comes along and it comes into the city of St. John in the Gulf of Maine. That's got enormous potential, but it also have enormous hydro dams. So we're trying to work where the hydropower is a fair trade-off. On the Kennebec, look at that. We could create 11 million alewife, and up to 3 or 4 million can come out of Cobbosee Stream. And that's why we're working so hard in the city of Gardner with the group of Upstream, because on the Cobbossee watershed, we've got a few ponds that have significant acreage. And with hundreds of acres of fresh, warm water, we can grow hundreds of thousands and millions of alewife without damaging that ecosystem. And it's really interesting because for every 35 fish that pass into a lake, 3 years later, 250 fish come back. That's the numbers that they've found because of the work that's been done for the past 20 years on Damariscotta Lake. And they've carefully managed it. They know how many alewife get there, and they know what comes back in the future years. So based on all of this, we need to do some careful work to restore our fisheries. I think that one of the most interesting part of this keystone species is looking at the real detail, the description, what they are. This is what I do in my spare time. I've been doing it for 15 plus years, 20 years, actually 30 years now, because it's been 20 years. I worked on this for 15 years before Edwards Dam came out. We started this whole effort with the Edwards Dam. Because of the Edwards Dam's removal and the Fort Halifax Dam removal, we had 6 million alewife pass at Benton Falls this last summer. And that will create an enormously larger number. In fact, the fish lift at Benton Falls is now at full capacity. It can't handle any more fish. So China Lake will be coming online in a couple of years, and we're hoping that Cobbossee watershed can come back online and move forward. The harvests are governed by the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. And this is the group of states that coordinate commercial harvest. And there's a whole series of details of what they look for to say what's a sustainable harvest and what's a sustainable run. And we're taking a slightly different approach on Cobbossee Stream. We're engaging the students at Gardner High School. And they're actually running the DMR protocol, sampling fish, they're weighing them, they're taking scale samples, they're determining the sex, and they come out 1 day a week during the entire run, and they run the protocol that DMR has put together. It's a really interesting story, and if this works, I can't promise you that it's going to work, I think that the kids should tell the story. I don't know how we're going to control the volume. No, it's not going to go. Yes, it is going to go. Excellent.
Okay, I kind of want him.
that fish.
So my name is Sharon Glant. I'm the AP bio teacher at Battenberg High School, and we were offered the opportunity to work with a nonprofit Upstream and the Department of Marine Resources in looking at an alewife project in Cobboseecontee. So of course I said yes. I mean, you know, take your kids outside every Wednesday for an hour and a half on a gorgeous sunny day. Who would say no to that? So it's an opportunity, I think, for kids to really learn about science, the kind of down and dirty nuts and bolts of it, that it doesn't always work perfectly each week, that there are some times that it runs super smooth and the data that you collect is wonderful, and then there's other times where you have outliers or that your process doesn't really work. And that's what science is about, figuring out what works, how to change it, and how to make it so that it's a process that every school can use in the state.
Is to catch the fish with a net, staying away from drop-offs and strong currents. And it's important to always wear a life jacket. It was much easier getting the run, and now to catch them with a net, now we have to use the fly fishing because they're a little fewer in numbers.
Diane and I are in charge of measuring the fish.
So what we do is we take the fish out of the bucket over there and we put it on this board to measure it. And so we pull the head down at this end.
Yeah, and then we measure to the fork of the tail, so the little V in the tail, the inside, and then we see what centimeter it's on.
And then we pass it off to the mass.
In my part of the procedure, after the fish were measured, I would mass it on the electronic scale in grams. And then I would have to take the average of the masses because it would fluctuate a lot because of how active the fish were. And after that, I would hand it off to the sex by Oliver or Seth.
I found the sex of the fish, and the way I did it was you held the fish, and then you squeezed its stomach while rubbing it, and if yellow eggs came out, it was a girl, and if white milk came out, it was a guy.
So one of my jobs was to scale the fish, and basically what I would do is every 3 fish, we had to collect a total of 50. I would take a dull knife, and someone would hold out the fish, and I would take the blade of the knife and scale upward, and then I would collect the scales, and I would take out the blue paper in here, and in the middle of the blue paper, place the scales on it. In addition, I would have to put the length, weight, sex of the fish, and then I would put this in the back, and I would collect up to a total of 15.
I was in charge of doing the recording for our citizen science project, and what I did is I basically listened to everyone else doing their jobs, and I recorded the mass, the length, and the sex of each fish, and I also recorded whether or not we took a scale from it, and it just helps us to determine like the average weight and average length and sex of the fish.
So when we catch the fish, we have an aerated tank
Where they can just go in there and breathe and wait for us to handle them. And then when we're handling them, we make sure that we do it really quickly so they don't die. And we also have extra buckets for filled with water in case they do need to go into the water while we're handling them.
Thank you.
So we have a lot of fun working with the kids, and we think that this is a good project. We think this is a project that we can get done. So I think that what we're really working on in Cobbosee Stream is to bring the community together to create a lot of interest in people in restoring the fish that feeds them all, a fish that's a keystone species that will build the birds, that will build the mammals, that bring this community back together as a whole, as an ecosystem. And I hope you found this interesting. Upstream is a 501c3 group. We're not a member organization. We're activists trying to really get a job done, and we're having a lot of fun at it. So if you have questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. Yes, sir?
You were saying that I don't think it was American tissue, but the dam above it just is getting a 40-year relicensing. Does that kind of preclude the opportunity, or?
I hope not. When the Federal Energy Regulatory gives a long-term license, they have to listen to the agencies, and the agencies are saying they have to have fish passage. So within 2 years of the time, can you turn that off? Yeah. Within 2 years of the time that, if you could go to the last slide, Beth, if you can find it. Within 2 years of the time that fish are there, they have to have fish passage for them. So there are 3 dams. There's American tissue that is not currently being used for anything in particular. There is New Mills at the top that impounds a great part of the recreational waterscape of Cobbosee Stream, and you'll never get that dam out. We think we can build fish passage at that site. We're going to try to do some preliminary engineering to see what the options are for that this summer and next year. That's one of the things that we're seeking funding for with National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. So we're trying to take this one step at a time.
Which dam is that one that you're trying to get the passage on?
This would be New Mills, which is the one that's right up on Route 126 where it goes out of town. You can see it there in the top of the watershed and garden, but that holds back all of Pleasant Pond. It's not likely that that will ever come out because the real estate is too valuable. So the balance is on Alewife is to find where you can use fish passage, where you can take a dam out to enable fish to get through. And if you can do that, the fish will come back. That's been proven. Yes, sir?
Have you emphasized the economic benefit of all the phosphorus that leaves with the alewives?
We're actually sponsors of a major discussion in the water conference that's going to be held this spring up in Augusta. And I'll let Johnny talk to that because Johnny is one of the board members of Upstream, and he's actually been involved in putting that conference together. There's a lot of debate around alewife, especially when you get into eastern Maine. There's a subspecies of alewife that will go and live in a lake year-round. Those are alewife that come out of the Great Lakes where they've adapted to that. All of the alewife that we have are free-swim alewife. They want to get out. A certain amount of them die during spawning. And that's some of the things, well, that's one of the issues that those that are concerned about alewife have. But we're actually sponsoring the conference that's going to try to shine light on this and bring some of this discussion out into the public and bring scientists together to bring the community together to make the right decision. Ed.
Steve, as you know, there's a Maine fishway law that goes way back in time meant for providing mandatory passage at non-hydro dams. It's been used maybe 8 times over the years, most recently at Cumberland Mills on the Presumpscot, where in 2013 that non-hydro dam finally got passage. This year they passed 53,000 river herring. Yep. We've been a fan of trying to do that at the first dam on the Cobboseecontee Stream, and maybe you could elaborate on why Upstream has been a little bit reluctant to get into that so far,
yeah.
What your plans are in the future.
Yeah, the Maine dam law is really interesting because it allows for a petitioning process. And if you can get 50 signatures, you can require the Commissioner of Marine Resources or Inland Fish and Wildlife to hold a hearing. And that's an adjudicatory hearing that's a basis for decision. I kind of think of it, if I were the owner of the Gardner Paperboard Dam, I know that they don't generate much revenue. They don't have anybody there year-round. They have a seasonal basis for taxis that are there that's probably generating enough money for them to pay their taxes. To all of a sudden come in and have this group of advocates saying, oh, we want you to build fish passage, and having the state come in and say you want to build fish passage, that's pretty harsh in Gardner, Maine. We kind of like to get along with each other. We think we've got a better solution for the dam owner, and we'd like to talk to him. We'd like to be able to explain to him how we can help him achieve his ends and ours as well. We think there's money available for fish passage. We're ready to help him do it. We're ready to raise the funds. We have the capacity to do it. And so we'd like to meet with the owner of this nonprofit. Actually, it's an LLC. We know who one of the principals is. We haven't been successful convincing him to meet with us yet, but we hope that maybe one of you know him. His name is Carter Becker. Tell him that the presentation that you heard says that we want to work with him, because that's our goal today. If it doesn't work today or tomorrow, if he refuses to talk to anybody, he's eventually going to have to deal with the state, because the state will force him to build a fish passage. But that'll probably bankrupt him at that site. So there's a balance point with this. And in Maine, we try to work together and get along together where we can. Yes, sir.
Steve talks about some of the challenges. And a huge challenge that I see is you've got the Cobboseecontee Watershed District, which is a nonprofit. Well, actually,
it's a government.
It's the only district set up by the state is opposed to the introduction. I mean, this is the watershed district that oversees probably 10 or 12 lakes, and Steve mentioned some. Plus, there's the Tacoma Lakes. Also, there's a lot of lakes all the way up to Mount Vernon. So they're opposed to it. And what I think the main points are, they don't know what the chemistry, how it's going to affect the chemistry. Is going to be as far as removing phosphorus or to add phosphorus. It's going to compete with the fisheries of what the game fish is. That was the point, because they eat zooplankton. Now, I was on the board for years. I can see both sides of the story, and I'm very happy that the sides are coming together to work out the chemistry of this thing.
Yeah, it's a really important thing to do. We meet with Bill Monagle on a regular basis, and it's really important to reach out to the parties that are involved.
Got to keep that.
Bill has been pretty clear that he's concerned about this, and which is why we've got the conference set up to go move forward and deal with the chemistry. In terms of the competition, we don't want to go basin-wide instantly. It doesn't make sense to do that. We want to start and do a little bit at a time. And in fact, we've been stocking alewife. The state's been stocking alewife in Pleasant Pond for over 20 years now. And look what's happened to that fishery. It's exploded. It's one of the best fisheries in the state. I think that the issue is being able to do it slowly, carefully, based on science, based on a community's support. And I think that Bill is going to be there to support us in the long run, as long as we aren't trying to do too much too fast. And I think that that's really the key here. We'd like to open up the lower stream up to New Mills, up past New Mills Dam, and maybe up to the base of Cobboseecontee, but not into Cobbossee until that lower watershed is set in an imbalance. We want to work with the agencies. We want to work with all of the stakeholders to do this. This is not something that you do overnight. This is something you build through education, one step at a time. Yes, sir.
At Gardner, is there any indication of fish trying to go up that stream?
Oh boy, you should see the number of fish those kids have to work with right at the base of that dam. And in the past, there have been photographs of Atlantic salmon beating their heads to death on that dam. They can't get up over it. I don't think that there's a lot of, it's about a 10 or 11, maybe 12-foot dam, and it's all granite block. And you could remove a portion of it to create fish passage very easily. It might be difficult to build a fish passage at that site, because you've got to build a fish passage with capacity for over 3 million fish. because you have to build a capacity at the lowermost dams that can do the entire watershed when the time comes to do that. So there are a lot of issues, and it's a fragile balance to work with. But come on up to Cobbosee Stream during the alewife run, and take a look at that Gardner Paperboard Dam in the morning on a bright sunny day, and you'll be astounded at the volume of fish waiting to get up.
So the fish come down the ladder?
There are separate, yes, there are separate ways to get fish out. Generally, fish will fall over a dam into what's called a plunge pool, so that they'll fall into a pool through a slot in the dam or in the boards at a dam. You have to, you're right, create a way to get out as well as to get up.
Going through a turbine.
Yeah, and the only turbines that exist are at the American Tissue Dam where they are generating. But there you could, in fact, screen the water to prevent the alewife from going down and create a separate way for them to get to a plunge pool and get out. Even in the interim, they're having to build a plunge pool for the experimental alewives that are already up there. That's already part of their license and that they've agreed to do. And the same is going to be true at the other sites on the stream.
That was an early success story at stopping alewife and eel slaughter. They were going through the turbines there. They were stopped at Pleasant Pond. And the gentleman that took over managing that dam went down to T.W. Dick, that used to be their steel supply, $2,200 or so, had a punch plate made up, little holes in it, put that in front of the turbines, and all mortality stopped.
Yeah. So you do get cooperation from sim dam owners as long as it's within their economic ability. Big effort, long time effort, exciting work to do because it's such an important thing to get the keystone species back. And I think that having those keystone species in place is a better asset with our climate change than anything else. We've got to look to the future. We've got to have the capacity for these ecosystems to thrive.
When you stop Pleasant Pond, are those fish going further up the Cobboseecontee?
Yeah, they'll go up Cobbosee Stream all the way to New Mills Dam, which is the next thing that blocks them. It's really interesting. I have a friend that lives up... Collins Mills, thank you. Collins Mills, thank you. I have a friend that lives just below Collins Mills, and he was out fishing for other fish, and all of a sudden, the next day, there are alewife, and he called the Marine Resources, and he said, when did you put the alewife in the stream just above Gardner? And it was the day before. So those fish will go day and night. They drive as to go as far as they can to find that freshwater lake. It's fascinating. It's fascinating. Yes, sir?
Did I hear you say they couldn't go up the Androscoggin because of the mill over here?
Yeah. The dam that's here, that was built about 45 years ago, has a fish passage. Has that fish passage ever worked?
Oh, it hasn't.
No. It passes a few alewife. It passes occasional shad, but there are holes. That fish passage, I have proof it was designed to fail. It was built by Central Maine Power at a time when they were in control of the river, and they didn't want fish up the river that they had to deal with at the rest of their dams. And they actually rearranged the turbines so that the high-velocity turbine is right adjacent to the entrance to the fish passage after the fish passage had been designed and put in place. So, and they bragged about it. They literally bragged about it in their boardroom. So, I mean, this has been a challenge. And right now, that dam is undergoing relicensing, and the public should raise up in alarm if they don't take care of that. That's something that is just unconscionable. It's a different owner. It's Brookfield that owns it now.